In another part of the world, the United States was funding an illegal war in Nicaragua, and drug smugglers were sending cocaine to the U.S. on U.S. planes. Somehow, the United States officials had no clue.
Whether the United States actually loaded up the planes with cocaine, or whether they just kind of turned their backs, right, and let the planes take off and go to the United States and land, the United States knew that at the very least that cocaine was being flown in and just ignored it.
And by the way, our lab was the one who discovered the crack epidemic, and we discovered crack 13 years before the word was even introduced into the lexicon.
And by the way, our lab was the one who discovered the crack epidemic, and we discovered crack 13 years before the word was even introduced into the lexicon.
That sounds like plenty enough time to come up with an agenda for a people that you would like to get rid of. More than enough time. And then pass that bill and use it.
Nixon administration official has admitted that the war on drugs is all about throwing black people in jail. He said, quote, "The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news."
So there it is. They confessed. It was never a war on drugs, but it was always a war on black people, so-called black people. The war was always on us. It was never on drugs. Hell, they dropped the drugs in the ghetto and the hoods. Where do you think the drugs came from? They put it there. This was their agenda, to destroy us, their agenda to incarcerate us at a very high rate, their agenda to break down the family, their agenda to put away the black man for life. This was their agenda. Get the black man out the house, incarcerate him for as long as possible, get the black woman on drugs, her children be born with the drugs in their system. So it's ultimately an agenda to destroy the whole family, like I said before in my last video. They plot these things. They study us. They see if their little tactics and plans is working on us. That's why they come together in Congress. That's why they revise and come up with these bills, because they study us. They drop stuff in the hood. They drop stuff in the ghettos to see if it's affecting us and see how far along their little plan has come. Is it working? What do we need to switch up now? Should we add this and take away this? And let's see how this affects them. Let's see if we poke them there, they'll scream. Let's see if we smash them there, they'll cry. Let's see if we put pressure here if they keep moving forward. So it's all devices, wicked devices, to literally destroy us as a people.
And that brings us to the major and sweeping effort that I'm announcing this morning. All the diverse agencies and law enforcement bureaus of the federal government will be brought together in a comprehensive attack on drug trafficking. We intend to do what is necessary.
Again, it was never about drug trafficking. It never was about that. It was an attack on the so-called blacks.
This is the first time since taking the oath of office that I felt an issue was so important, so threatening, that it warranted talking directly with you, the American people. All of us agree that the gravest domestic threat facing our nation today is drugs. We need more prisons, more jails, more courts, more prosecutors. So tonight I'm requesting altogether an almost $1.5 billion increase in drug-related federal spending on law enforcement. Victory over drugs is our cause, a just cause. And with your help, we are going to win.
Need more prisons, need more jails, more lawyers, more prosecutors. See, they created this. They created this. We are a peaceful people. We mind our business. We stick amongst our people. We don't bother anybody, okay? Y'all create this disaster for us, and then you don't know how to control it once you created it. And so the only thing to come up with, okay, let's sabotage them. Let's set them up. Let's give them something, see if they like it. And once they hooked on it, let's take them down for it. Because they won't be able to let it go themselves. This is wicked. These are wicked to mold. How the nations come together, come up with these agendas, these plans to cut us off as a people, to destroy us as a people.
And another big challenge is to battle drug use. Today, I'm proud to announce a national drug control strategy. It is a plan that will lay out a comprehensive strategy, which is why the budget I submitted to Congress calls for $19 billion.
And we'll stop it. We'll stop the drugs from pouring into our nation.
While crack did absolutely ravage some black and brown communities, it wasn't that simple. The United States government and agents of the state were corrupt and had a hand in creating this dark time in America's history. Misinformation about crack cocaine and its users flooded airwaves and proved to be just as dangerous as the substance itself. Decades after the crack era has come and gone, its impact lives on. But before we fall any deeper into this rabbit hole, let's take it back to the beginning of this war on drugs, which is often dubbed America's longest war in history.
Please search for it!
The federal government first banned the recreational use of a substance, opium, in the early 1900s. Then came the Prohibition era, which focused on alcohol. Shortly after, the feds began to track and vilify people who struggled with addiction, especially if they were black. Fast forward to 1971, when Richard Nixon declared war.
America's public enemy number one is drug abuse.
2 presidents later, Ronald Reagan not only carried on, but weaponized this anti-drug stance.
Drugs are menacing our society.
Though Reagan was the first president who promised to
make America great again.
At first, we saw it in the African American Latinx communities. Then, we're like, oh my God, there's an epidemic. The politicians weren't talking about it. The media wasn't talking about it. The police were not stopping it. That's a big part of it.
Some dirty cops took money from drug dealers, or they took drug money themselves.
What would you steal? Money and drugs and guns, whatever was it.
And somehow this fact was left out of the media. Wonder why?
You see, these people are crooked. These people are crooked. They seized drugs, guns, and what did they do? They stole it. They kept it from themselves. They seized money. What they do? They steal it. They keep it for themselves. They're crooked. They created this mess.
And then there was a shift.
A local success story took a tragic turn this morning.
Maryland basketball star Len Bias died after overdosing on cocaine 2 days after he was drafted to the Boston Celtics.
It was like a political wet dream, because now all politicians, Democrats, Republicans, everybody was talking about the scourge of crack and the evil dealers who are dealing crack. It was crazily overblown.
And from the era emerged some dangerous myths about black people.
Go! First of all, there was the crackhead, just had given up their lives to crack and, would do anything for crack. Then there was a crack mama. That was, basically black women. This woman sold her baby for crack.
And an equally damaging falsehood, the crack baby.
Despite all the warnings, a growing number of babies are being born already addicted to cocaine.
They'll spend the rest of their lives suffering for the lifestyle of their mothers.
What would you do about pregnant women who use drugs and pass those drugs on to their babies?
The media played a huge part in making the public feel that crack was really the real threat and that treatment wasn't the answer, but jail.
And the federal government's response to the war on drugs was clear.
And here we go. We knew that was coming. This is where you get byword and proverb from. They come up with these names. In the midst of their projects, they come up with these names for us. Crackhead now, basehead, crack baby. You see, the nations create these names and they mock us. They create these disastrous things for us and then they mock us. They come up with names and they mock us. This is wicked.
Lock them up and throw away the key.
This bill, we have drug treatment and we have other treatments to try to deal with it, but they are in jail. Away from my mother, your husband, our families.
While crack did absolutely ravage some black and brown communities, it wasn't that simple. The United States government and agents of the state were corrupt and had a hand in creating this dark time in America's history. Misinformation about crack cocaine and its users flooded airwaves and proved to be just as dangerous as the substance itself. Decades after the crack era has come and gone, its impact lives on. But before we fall any deeper into this rabbit hole, let's take it back to the beginning of this war on drugs, which is often dubbed America's longest war in history.
Please search for it!
The federal government first banned the recreational use of a substance, opium, in the early 1900s. Then came the Prohibition era, which focused on alcohol. Shortly after, the feds began to track and vilify people who struggled with addiction, especially if they were black. Fast forward to 1971, when Richard Nixon declared war.
America's public enemy number one is drug abuse.
2 presidents later, Ronald Reagan not only carried on, but weaponized this anti-drug stance.
Drugs are menacing our society.
Though Reagan was the first president who promised to
make America great again.
But rather, he made things worse for low-income communities. In fact, at the time, the poverty rate grew faster in the first 3 years of Reagan's presidency than in any other time since the 1950s. Stanley Nelson is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, MacArthur genius, and director of Crack: Cocaine, Corruption, and Conspiracy. He says that this rampant poverty and international scandal, which caused cocaine to flood the United States, was the backdrop in which the crack era took off.
The crack era seemed to come out of nowhere, somewhere in the early 80s. All of a sudden, everywhere in Harlem, people would be out on the street selling and using crack. Not Harlem, people would be out on the street selling and using crack. Not only in Harlem, I remember, I was walking across 42nd Street and people were in doorways smoking crack.
In his film, Nelson walks viewers through various phases of the crack epidemic.
At first, we saw it in the African American Latinx communities. Then, we were like, oh my God, there's an epidemic. The politicians weren't talking about it. The media wasn't talking about it. The police were not stopping it. That's a big part of it.
Some dirty cops took money from drug dealers, or they took drug money themselves. While chemically, powder cocaine, which was often used by white people, and crack cocaine, which was more accessible and believed to be used by black people, are practically the same, if you're caught using or selling either drug, the law says otherwise. During the crack era, the sentencing disparity was crazy. The rule was 100 to 1. So 5 grams of crack would land you with a 5-year mandatory minimum, but it would take 500 grams of cocaine to get the same sentence. Now, here's the kicker. Black people made up 82% of the folks convicted for federal crack and cocaine offenses, but only 30% of crack users. 62% of people convicted for crack offenses were low-level sellers or lookouts. Today, the number of Americans incarcerated for drug offenses went from 40,900 in 1980 to 443,200 in 2018. With over 2 million people locked up, which is a 500% increase over the last 40 years, 1 in 5 incarcerated people is locked up for a drug offense. And being convicted of a felony can impact your voting rights, access to loans, and ability to get a job, among other factors.
See, although their agenda was to totally annihilate and get rid of us, it didn't work. It didn't work because the more they oppressed us, the more we multiplied. Yes, you did a mass incarceration on the so-called black man, which ultimately broke down the family. It broke down the homes. But we just continue to multiply. Because the thing is, no matter what agenda they come up with, no matter what plan, whatever tactic or evil device they try to use against the Most High chosen people, it will not work. It will fail. That's why they have to keep coming back together in these meetings and coming up with new bills. Keep coming back together and coming up with new tactics, new ideas, new wicked inventions to destroy us, because it's not working. It's not going to work because we're the Most High chosen people. But with that being said, we have to repent of our sins, return back to the Most High, and keep His law, statutes, and commandments. Shalom.